Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. Tomorrow is UFC 289, Amanda Nunes versus Irene Aldana. And in the co-main event, we have an amazing lightweight matchup, Charles Oliveira versus Beneil Dariush. This is the people's main event of UFC 289. I cannot wait for this matchup. But something has been shocking to me in the lead up to this fight, and that is that I believe the majority of the MMA community is overlooking Charles Oliveira and picking Beneil Dariush to win this fight. And we are going to discuss all the reasons I believe this is happening. Some are perfectly logical, others I completely disagree with. But we're also going to discuss another reason that I've seen very rarely mentioned when justifying a pick for Beneil Dariush, and it's almost like the MMA community has completely forgotten about this, and I believe it should be mentioned more. And then also at the end of this video, we are going to briefly go over my prediction for Oliveira versus Dariush. I've already done a full breakdown and prediction video. I'll link it down in the description if you want to go check it out after this. But before I get into anything, if you picked Beneil Dariush, that is perfectly fine. I have no problem with that prediction. That's a perfectly reasonable prediction. The point of this video is that I am just shocked that the majority is siding with Beneil Dariush. I thought going into this fight, the majority would be picking Charles Oliveira. And my perception comes from live chats, from comments, from Twitter. Now, I wanted to say, okay, well, let's do a poll on my channel. Let's see what the poll comes up. And I did a poll on my channel, and 56% picked Charles Oliveira over Dariush to win. Dariush got 44% of the vote. But then I said, where can I get a larger sample size? Because I feel like this isn't accurate for what I've been perceiving over the course of the last couple weeks. So I went and took a look at Tapology. They're going to have more votes than I would have. And 54% are picking Beneil Dariush, where 46% are picking Charles Oliveira. And that's more in line with what I was thinking. I thought, honestly, when I went to Tapology, I thought it was going to be quite a bit higher. I thought it'd be like maybe 60% to 40% or 65 to 35%. But then after I confirmed my suspicions by looking at Tapology, which isn't the end-all be-all, but combining that with what I've experienced over the past couple weeks, combining that with Tapology, I was thinking, what are the main reasons people are picking Beneil Dariush over Charles Oliveira? And one of the reasons that I've seen regurgitated around the MMA community that I completely disagree with is that Charles Oliveira is 0-4 in Canada. And this is true. Charles Oliveira is 0-4 in Canada. He lost to Jim Miller, he lost to Cub Swanson, he lost to Max Holloway, and he lost to Anthony Pettis. And all these losses were via stoppage. The Max Holloway fight, he got injured in the middle of the fight, but still all four of these fights were via stoppage. But I think you have to add context to that. The most recent of those four fights was a loss to Anthony Pettis, and that was in 2016, 7 years ago. Charles Oliveira is a completely different fighter from 7 years ago against Anthony Pettis, and some of these fights were even earlier than that. And I just think these fights are essentially irrelevant. Charles Oliveira is a completely different fighter. He hit his prime, in the last couple years, the last 3 or 4 years. He's still in the prime of his career. We're talking about 7 years ago. 7 years ago, he was 26 years old. Just for comparison, Paddy Pimlett's 28 right now, and he's still getting easy matchups. So I just think those fights are irrelevant. And then you take in the factor, oh, he's 0-4 in Canada. I don't think that necessarily matters. I don't think that has any bearing on whether or not he lost or won the fight. It just happened to be that all four of these fights were in Canada. Now, another reason I've seen people mention why they're picking Beneil Dariush over Charles Oliveira, and this reason is more true, and I've even mentioned it in my breakdown and prediction video, and that is that Charles Oliveira gets hurt in every single fight. And that is true. You look back at his last fight, he got dropped by Islam Makhachev. We'll talk more about that fight in a minute, before he got finished. You go back to the fight before that against Justin Gaethje, he got dropped by Justin Gaethje. You go back to the fight before that against Dustin Poirier at UFC 269, got dropped in that fight. You go back to when he initially won the vacant lightweight title against Michael Chandler, almost got finished in the first round. So that is true. He does get hit quite a bit, and he does get dropped quite a bit. But I also believe you can add a bit of context to that too, is Oliveira, in the majority of his fights, outside of the Islam Makhachev fight where he didn't really have this advantage, Charles Oliveira would use his jiu-jitsu and his submission threat as a defense mechanism. When he got hit, even if he wasn't hurt badly to the point he'd be dropped, he would fall to his back just so he could recover a little bit, because Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler wouldn't want to jump into his guard. Now, Michael Chandler did a little bit and did some ground and pound, but I think you have to take that into account. It's not like every single one of these drops has been where Oliveira is brutally hurt and almost finished. The Michael Chandler one, he was. But a lot of these other ones, especially against Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, I feel like he got clipped a little bit, he got stung a little bit, and he's like, okay, I'm going to fall to my back just because I know they won't follow me down here, and then I can recover. So I just believe, even though it's true, I believe you have to add context to that. So another reason I believe that Charles Oliveira is being massively overlooked in this fight is because I believe for a long time, a lot of people didn't believe in Charles Oliveira. I felt like going to that Chandler fight, a lot of people were picking Michael Chandler. Now I look back on Tapology, it was closer to 50-50, but I felt like the majority of people were picking Michael Chandler, even though I did believe it was close. But I believe Charles Oliveira should have been, same as this fight, I believe more people should have been picking Charles Oliveira. Then in his next fight against Dustin Poirier, definitely the majority was picking Dustin Poirier. And then against Justin Gaethje, it was closer to 50-50. And then I was like, I can't believe this is close to 50-50 after what he did to Dustin Poirier. And then for Islam Makhachev, the majority finally decided we're going to pick Charles Oliveira. And I went back and looked at Tapology to confirm all this. The majority of people picked Charles Oliveira to defeat Islam Makhachev after kind of shying away from him. And I know that's a bit of an exaggeration, but shying away from him in the Chandler fight, shying away from him in the Dustin Poirier fight, shying away from him in the Justin Gaethje fight. Now everyone was like, okay, we've doubted him for so long. We're picking Charles Oliveira to defeat Islam Makhachev. And I just believe that is another reason why people are now kind of doubting Charles Oliveira again, because going into that Islam Makhachev fight, people had decided, okay, I've doubted him for too long. He's definitely going to beat Islam Makhachev. And I felt like it was like 65 to 35% picking Charles Oliveira. And then what happened to Oliveira in that fight? He went out, Islam Makhachev put on a world-class performance, dropped him in the second round, and submitted him relatively easy with an arm triangle. So I think having that fight, I think a lot of people are like, you know what? I'm back on not believing in Charles Oliveira. And that's why I believe a lot of people are picking Beneil Dariush in this fight. And the other reason is you go back to UFC 280 and you look at UFC 280 as a whole, who also fought on that card? You have Beneil Dariush fighting Mateusz Gamrot. And I feel like a lot of people counted out Beneil Dariush in that fight. And what happened? Beneil Dariush went out there, won in the striking, and the scrambles and the defensive grappling from Beneil Dariush was unbelievable. So I think you compound that with the fact that then Oliveira essentially got dominated in the main event, even though I think it was more competitive than people remember. Islam Makhachev won every second of the fight. I just think people put those two together. They see Beneil Dariush having an amazing performance on UFC 280. They see Charles Oliveira losing his title and getting dominated at UFC 280, even though technically he didn't lose his title. I think that's why a lot of people are picking Beneil Dariush in this fight, because of their last two performances, or each of their last performances were at UFC 280. One looked great and one looked not so great in their fight and lost. And you also have to take into account Beneil Dariush is on this long winning streak. I think he's on an 8-fight winning streak. And Charles Oliveira is on a 1-fight losing streak. So you put that into account, even though Charles Oliveira, I mean, his streak before the Islam Makhachev fight, I mean, Justin Gaethje, first round rear naked choke. Dustin Poirier, third round rear naked choke. Michael Chandler, second round TKO. What an incredible streak that was, compared to Beneil Dariush's streak, where you have Mateusz Gamrot, that's a great win. The Tony Ferguson win was back in May of 2021. That hasn't aged very well. The Carlos Diego Ferreira fight, he almost lost. That was a split decision. Carlos Diego Ferreira took the third round. Second round was up for grabs. I thought Dariush won the fight, but nonetheless, having a close fight with Carlos Diego Ferreira back in February of 2021, you know what I mean? The resumes aren't even comparable. Then you go back, you're looking at Scott Holtzman. He KO'd him via spinning back fist in the first round. But again, look who it's against. And then before that, he almost lost to Jakar Close before he came back and KO'd Jakar Close. When you compare that to Charles Oliveira's resume, I just think that's crazy to even think, you know, Beneil Dariush, I understand he's on the long winning streak. But to lose to Islam Makhachev, I don't think it's that bad of a loss. And then just to go back and touch on people saying, well, Oliveira gets hurt in every fight and Oliveira's been finished. You look at Beneil Dariush, he got KO'd by Alexander Hernandez. He got KO'd by Edson Barboza. In both of those fights, he was flatlined. He got submitted by Michael Chiesa. And he also got KO'd by Ramsey Ninjum back in 2014. Now, again, those losses were a long time ago. The Ramsey Ninjum loss was in 2014. The Chiesa fight was in 2016. The Barboza fight was in 2017. The Hernandez fight was in 2018. But still, if you're going to take into account some of those older stoppage losses of Charles Oliveira, I think you should also be taking into account Beneil Dariush's losses where he's been flatline KO. We've never seen Charles Oliveira flatline KO'd ever. And I just think that is crazy to mention losses. I've talked about this with Charles Oliveira for a long time. To mention losses, Paul Felder was 6 years ago. That's craziness. The Ricardo Lamas loss was 7 years ago. The Anthony Pettis fight was 7 years ago. The Max Holloway fight was 8 years ago. The Frankie Edgar loss was 10 years ago. The Cub Swanson loss was 11 years ago. That is crazy. Donald Cerrone was 12 years ago. So a lot of these losses that people look at on Charles Oliveira's resume was when he was very young. He entered the UFC, I believe, at 20 years old or 21 years old, and people are still talking about these losses. These losses are essentially irrelevant at this point in time. And I know people don't want to hear that. And again, I'm not saying picking Beneil Dariush is wrong, but I'm just saying in my mind, when I break down this fight and I look at this fight, Oliveira started to go into his prime in the last couple years. I don't even think he was in his prime when he started his win streak. I really started to think he got in his prime around like 2020, 2021. And so to count losses from 7, 8 years ago, that's like saying, oh, Beneil Dariush got beat up on the playground as a middle schooler, so therefore he's going to lose this fight to Charles Oliveira in 2023. Doesn't make any sense to me. But I do believe there is a reason. And again, I don't think all those reasons, I do think you have to take some of that stuff into account. I'm not completely saying they're disqualifying or you shouldn't take them into account. I'm just saying my perception and adding context to a lot of these from my point of view, what I'm thinking regarding this fight. But another reason I haven't really seen a whole lot of people mentioning, and I feel like people forgot, this fight was originally scheduled for UFC 288 on May 6th. Charles Oliveira pulled out with an injury. That's concerning to me that he pulled out with an injury only to reschedule it a month later. What was that injury? So I'm a little bit worried about that going into this fight. I think that should be, a massive factor if you're picking Beneil Dariush, looking, okay, what was Charles Oliveira's injury? Was it ever disclosed? I haven't been able to find it anywhere. So I think that is a factor in this fight. But as far as my breakdown for this fight, and I've already done a full breakdown and prediction, which will be linked, I think Charles Oliveira gets it done, and I don't think Charles Oliveira is going to have a whole lot of trouble with Beneil Dariush. I do think it will be a fun fight while it lasts. I do think maybe Oliveira gets clipped up a little bit. But when I watched their most recent fights, when I watched Beneil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot, even though his defensive grappling looked incredible, even though his kicks to the body and kicks to the legs looked incredible, what I saw was Beneil Dariush is best when he's fighting moving forward, and also when he has a striking advantage, which he had against Mateusz Gamrot. He's not going to have that same advantage against Charles Oliveira. I think Charles Oliveira is the more technical striker. I think he has more power. And I think Charles Oliveira is going to beat Charles Oliveira and consistently move forward against Beneil Dariush. So I think Dariush is going to have to try to grapple, but he doesn't have the best offensive grappling. So I think Dariush is going to be clinching up, looking for takedowns. And guess what I believe is Charles Oliveira's most underrated weapon? His offense in the clinch. His knees to the body are unbelievable. And I just believe in this fight, Dariush is going to be getting outclassed on the feet. Maybe he has a moment where he hurts Charles Oliveira, but I just don't think he's going to be able to get down on top of him and control him for a full round. We've seen Oliveira scramble out from underneath Islam Makhachev. So I don't think Dariush, one, I don't think he has the offensive wrestling to just go out there and double leg Oliveira and take him down. Two, even if he hurts him or clips him and Oliveira falls to his back, I do believe Oliveira or Dariush has the jiu-jitsu to follow him down there and not worry about it. But I think Oliveira, once he clears the cobwebs, he'll be able to scramble back to his feet. And I just think Oliveira, what it comes down to is Oliveira is more technical in the feet. And I just think his striking is far superior than Beneil Dariush. The only hole in Charles Oliveira's game is his defensive striking, in my opinion. And I just don't think Dariush is fast enough or throws enough straight punches to take advantage of that. He throws a lot of wild looping punches that aren't particularly fast. And when I rewatched some of that striking against Mateusz Gamrot, it didn't look that good. When I rewatched some of the striking against Tony Ferguson, it didn't look that good. And even Tony Ferguson, even though he got out grappled for 3 rounds, Tony Ferguson was able to stuff a couple takedowns and even get up back to his feet like once or twice. If Tony Ferguson can do that, who's been notorious for terrible wrestling, I think Charles Oliveira can definitely do it. And then I went back to the Carlos Diego Fajeda fight. Carlos Diego Fajeda was landing big shots on Beneil Dariush Tony Ferguson or Charles Oliveira has far better striking than Carlos Diego Ferreira. So I just think Charles Oliveira is going to get this done. My official prediction was Charles Oliveira hurts him in the second round with a straight right hand, follows him to the ground, and finds a rear naked choke in that second round. And I'm very confident in Charles Oliveira. But what makes UFC 289's co-main event so compelling is some of you guys might be right. Some of your analysis might be right. Maybe Beneil Dariush goes out there and gets it done. I just wanted to make this video because I feel like a lot of people were alluding to, well, Charles Oliveira lost to Islam Makhachev. Now he's washed up. And I just don't believe that's the case. He may lose this fight, and Beneil Dariush may very well be the better fighter. But I don't think it's because Charles Oliveira is washed up. I think it's Beneil Dariush has rapidly improved. And this, for Beneil Dariush, this is now or never. He's getting up there in age. It doesn't seem like the UFC even wants to give him a title shot with a win over Charles Oliveira, which is craziness to me. Dana White was non-committal on that. He was non-committal about giving Dariush a title shot with a win over Oliveira, but he was committing to giving Colby Covington a title shot over the winner of Usman versus Edwards 3. That's crazy to me. Unhinged Dana White at its finest. But I do believe people are massively overlooking Charles Oliveira in this fight, and I think Oliveira gets it done. And I wanted to put out this video because I wanted to discuss it. I think some of these reasons are fairly logical. I think others I just disagree with, or I feel like they need context. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Am I crazy? Are people overlooking Oliveira, or am I just crazy? Because I feel like a lot of people, not only are they picking Beneil Dariush, they are super confident in picking Beneil Dariush. And I just don't see that at all. If Beneil Dariush wins this fight, I think he has to clip Charles Oliveira on the feet and finish him via TKO. That's how I think Dariush has to win this fight. I don't see a whole lot of other avenues to victory for Beneil Dariush. But let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.